Chapter 5 Season 3 is by far Fortnite's most divisive season. Honestly, while I find debating a season's weight to be very interesting, there seems to be a large disconnect with the way people formulate their arguments surrounding this season. It's something that has come to my attention over the past few seasons, largely because of the type of content I produce, as it's more critical towards the game. A lot of people seem to lack an open-minded perspective when discussing the game, and it leads to many people dismissing an argument as a whole in an effort to devalue the point the person is making. I find it all very cringe that you can't hold a perspective without being told that you hate change or can't adapt, or really any other buzzwords that people will throw out when you offer genuine feedback based on your experience. That being said, I want to make my perspective very clear that I don't think this is a good season. Not in the slightest. However, considering there are a large number of people who found this season to be quite enjoyable, I understand that my perspective is going to take some explaining. This season is plagued by one main issue: the gameplay. I know that sounds incredibly broad, because you can essentially attribute this criticism to many seasons that are poorly received. However, it presents issues here mainly in the way people engage in fights. Vehicles absolutely dominate the meta this season, which changes how the game plays and feels on a fundamental level. But before I get more into the fundamentals of this season, I think it's important to address the broken nature of these vehicles. Cars this season have been most heavily compared to the mechs, and while I think that comparison is going to set a lot of people off, there are many valid reasons as to why this is the case. The cars and mechs both achieve Epic's quote-unquote mission of Fortnite. Essentially, for those who are unaware, the mission of Fortnite is to bring players of all skill levels together to have a fun experience where anyone can win. The mechs and cars both achieve this goal quite well, as they give anyone a shot at their first elimination or even victory royale moments, and the satisfying feeling that comes with it. Now, I shouldn't have to explain why this is stupid, but since video literacy is dead, I'll give you a bit of a refresher. It all boils down to one major thing: a lack of skill. The moment you attempt to atone for an abundance of sweaty or good players with the addition of broken items, weapons, or in this case vehicles, to counterbalance skill with cancer, your season gets an automatic F, similar to when you leave out your works cited page in an essay. If you have to resort to these types of additions, you're ultimately exploring the lazy option for a fix to the quote-unquote sweat issue that Fortnite has. And I already know that many people are going to overlook everything I just said when comparing and discussing the impact of the mechs and the cars on the game, with the idea that cars aren't as broken as the mechs, as if that's a defense. If when discussing the power of the new cars you have to draw a comparison to the mech, there's a strong likelihood that it's at the very least broken considering the standards you're using to judge it. Yes, the mech is technically more powerful than the new cars, but that doesn't absolve the issues surrounding them. It's actually interesting that the idea of something not being as strong or powerful as something else is enough to change players' opinion on the new broken thing. Epic is well aware of this, and they will often use it to their advantage when attempting to promote a new item or vehicle that exists in the realm of being far too powerful. When the mechs were originally added in Season X, they were practically unstoppable in most situations. It seems like Epic's intention with making these new additions unfathomably unbalanced for the first few weeks is for players who are of a lower skill to get the opportunity to explore the mission of Fortnite, so to speak. And after Epic does apply nerfs to them, the blow is significant enough to make some difference to them even if they remain broken. It's essentially a win-win scenario for Epic, because the group they are attempting to appeal to can get extremely easy eliminations or wins, and after 2 weeks they can implement the true values they likely wanted for these broken additions in the first place, and it's more difficult to complain about because by comparison they are technically worse. Oh, and if you don't believe me, the mech started off with this laser pointer attached to the side of it that held no function in the first 2 weeks. One of the many nerfs applied to this vehicle was the addition of a targeting laser, which was something they already had planned for with the mech's design. Look, I know I rambled quite a bit, but ultimately cars and mechs by design are created to deal a significant blow to the main mechanic, building. And with that being said, I think it's important to address common arguments that have cropped up as a result of these additions. I have heard a lot of people discuss the idea that this season doesn't feel like Fortnite, and while many are quick to state that this isn't the case, I actually think this season deviates so heavily from the core gameplay that it's difficult to say that this statement doesn't hold some weight. Very few fights this season take place utilizing the core mechanics that have been defining for this game over the years. As a result, it leaves a lot of people jaded towards the new season as a whole, because a large group of people, including myself, have stuck around to continue to play Fortnite due to part of its unique identity as the boots on the ground building game with aggressive gunplay. The annoying thing is anytime you try to challenge the argument of this season being good with the idea that it alters the core gameplay too heavily, people will spout off about how it changes the formula of Fortnite, and you just hate change. The problem is this argument is ultimately a straw man. It intentionally misrepresents the position that me and many others hold on how change should be approached in an effort to easily dismiss the criticism as a whole. I have never been of the opinion that Fortnite shouldn't change. That's completely brain dead. However, this idea that it changes the formula of Fortnite being a good thing doesn't really make much sense when you stop to think about it. Essentially, if your entire argument boils down to a season that plays differently, that by itself doesn't constitute a good season. We have had countless seasons that play different than past ones that were absolutely terrible. Sure, they may have introduced something that made the game play different, and I can understand why people would find that interesting at first. However, the execution of the overall content falls short, resulting in a bad season. The main thing that we can gather from this is that it's important to appeal to a broader sense of the game's identity. Even though change is a massive part of Fortnite's identity, so is building. So when you alter building in a negative way, even if indirectly, you are going to naturally upset much of the community who enjoys the game because of these advanced mechanics. This season appeals to one trend of Fortnite's identity, and that's change. Everything else might be thrown by the wayside, but people who elect to defend this season don't care, because they now have some semblance of an argument, one that mind you is very dismissive, where they can go out of their way to say that this season works. The problem is you can apply this argument to almost any season over the past 7 years that has had issues. For example, Chapter 2 Season 6 changes the formula of Fortnite. It adds many new items that we have never seen before, as well as many features that are completely unique to any shooter. It appeals to Fortnite's main identity of adapting and evolving, while being a season that I found to be very fun.
Wow.
Season X introduced the mechs, which completely changed how people played the game during their encounters with it.
This guy has one kill!
I would argue because no other season during Chapter 1 was able to alter gameplay this heavily, they don't represent Fortnite's identity of evolution quite as well. Did I mention I liked the season? Now, just to clarify, I didn't find either of these seasons to be good, but hopefully you can understand that this argument doesn't hold up when using the same logic and applying it to seasons that were widely accepted as being shit. Now, a lot of this discourse surrounding change has brought up another argument in the community that is a bit problematic. It's essentially a question of if you really enjoyed this season, do you even really like Fortnite considering what the game was? While I went out of my way to disprove the idea of change trumping core gameplay features, I do find this question to be a bit unfair. I really do understand why a lot of people like this season, and just because you find this formula of the game to be fun, doesn't mean you can't also enjoy a more basic approach to Fortnite. However, I do understand where this question is coming from because it does seem like the moment that the building mechanic is hindered in any way, there are a large number of people who will go out of their way to commend Epic for creating changes that aggravate large portions of the community. This leads many people to the conclusion that the group responsible for this praise of terrible decision making don't really enjoy the game Fortnite, because otherwise why would you go out of your way to constantly congratulate handicapping a mechanic that is what made the game so special in the first place? Look, I could keep deconstructing shitty arguments in favor or even against this season, but ultimately constantly having to correct misguided notions doesn't solve the bigger issue at hand. Fortnite is filled with countless seasons that damage parts of the game that might not always appeal to you, but that doesn't mean the damage isn't a problem. Even if we look from the perspective of a competitive player with a season like Chapter 2 Season 1, while most people would view that season as terrible, someone with a more competitive nature might look at the balanced loot pool and strong map and come to the conclusion that the season works for them. However, Chapter 2 Season 1 had little to no content, which is a huge part of the game's identity. While some might not take issue with a more static or consistent experience, it's outright impossible to state that this season was good due to the missing aspects that make a strong season. Chapter 5 Season 3 lacks a balanced competitive scene and outright throws building in the shitter in favor of cars, fists, and nitro splash. Getting mad at the community for not accepting a season like Chapter 2 Season 1, or in this case Chapter 5 Season 3, doesn't solve the bigger issue. At the end of the day, Epic is to blame. They have had countless opportunities to make changes that can appeal to both sides of the community, but instead they opt for a one-size-fits-all solution that drives a wedge between the player bases and leads to much resentment. Not many other games suffer from this constant divide within their own community, but due to Epic's stubbornness and laziness, they have created a terrible experience and a toxic community to accompany it. Everything about the season, from the way the community responds to criticism, or how Epic tackles change within their game, as well as misguided and misdirected blame, is all very turbo cringe.